Hello everyone and welcome to Oh Yum. I'm Anna Olson and I'm so glad you could join me for a decadent recipe. I know you like my bits of baking wisdom and tips along the way, so you're going to get so much out of my triple chocolate cheesecake recipe. And it's with special thanks to Rolling Meadow Farms that we're able to be together and I'm able to make this recipe for you. Now, what makes this a triple chocolate cheesecake? Chocolate crust, chocolate filling, and then a ganache poured over top. So let's get started with the chocolate crust. Typical to most cheesecakes, this is a crumb crust. So I have 1.5 cups of ground dry cookie crumbs. And I see your comments and questions through all of the Oh Yum videos that I have on this channel, and you ask a lot about a crust that gets kind of soggy, even if you put double foil on the pan, even if you know you've got enough butter, even if you bake and you know it's completely cooled. The cookie choice itself can have a big difference or a big impact. And so I find a chocolate cookie crumb crisps up wonderfully. Graham cracker works beautifully, but a digestive cookie, which is more common if you're baking in the UK, it's true, they can go kind of soft quickly, even if you've baked and cooled it properly. So if you're going for a different cookie choice, something crisp, not shortbready or soft. If it's a crisp cookie, it'll give you a crisp crust. I'm also going to measure out 60 grams, so that's a 1/4 cup of unsalted butter into a pot because I need to melt that for the crust. So let me just get that. There we go, exactly 60. I'll need this butter for the ganache glaze. I'll set that aside and just melt the butter however you wish. I'll keep my scale handy. I've got my crumbs. And while the butter is melting, let's talk for a second about the pan. So we've got something new here with these Oh Yum sessions. We've got the chocolate cam. Well, at least for today, it's the chocolate cam. So Michael is behind running the 2 cameras and he can zoom in on anything I have to show you. So with a cheesecake, you want to use a Springform pan. That's a pan with a latch on it. This is a 9-inch or 23 centimeter pan, which is a standard size for a cheesecake. And I've greased it lightly, bottom and sides. You don't want to put parchment paper on there because I find it's a mess to try and peel off a cheesecake. And for this cheesecake recipe, we are cooking it in a water bath, a bain-marie. So I do double wrap my pan in foil. That way it just prevents any cheesecake from leaking out or any water from seeping in as it's cooking. And we'll get into those cooking methods when it comes to cheesecake as we go along. And of course, I see all of your questions about how to avoid or prevent cracking in your cheesecake. And I've got those tips for you as we work through the recipe, because there's not just one fix, it's a number of steps throughout a cheesecake process that really helps you understand what's happening and how to prevent the cheesecake from cracking. I will tell you that a chocolate cheesecake is less prone to cracking than a regular cheesecake, simply because of the quantity of chocolate in there. My butter is melted, so I'm just going to pour that over my cookie crumbs and give it a little stir. There's no dramatic difference here. You'll see the cookie crumbs go glossy. Just so long as it's evenly combined, you're fine. If you wanted to do chocolate sandwich cookies, I think that would work as a good option. Someone had written asking if a chocolate chip cookie dough could make a good cheesecake base. I think it could. I think it could be delicious. You just want to make sure that if you're making the cookie dough, pressing it in your pan, make sure it's baked fully through and not soft in the middle, because it will continue to soften with the weight of that cheesecake filling on top of it. All right, so I've got a nice dark, can we have a chocolate cam focus here? Here we go, finding the perfect spot. So we've got a crumbly mixture, and now this gets poured directly into the pan, and I press it in the bottom of the pan. So this cheesecake crust doesn't go up the sides. Are you still on the chocolate cam, Michael?
I am.
Okay. And I use the back of the spoon. If you start getting your hands in there, you're just going to make a mess. but using the back of the spoon allows you to kind of coax the chocolate crumb mixture into place. Now, one of you Oh Yum subscribers asked a great question. Well, could you not just put this in the fridge to set instead of baking it? If you don't bake it for a baked cheesecake, you won't get the crispness of the crust at all. And you want to create that barrier of layers so the cheesecake doesn't seep in. So if I do a no-bake cheesecake, well, I don't bake the crust. But for this one, we're going to pop into a 350 or 180 Celsius oven for 10 minutes. There's going to be no visible change. 10 minutes assures that you're toasting up the cookie crumbs just fine. Here we go. I'll set my timer and try and pay attention to it. And now, while we're letting that bake, good news is I have one already baked and cooled right here. And it looks no different. As you can see, it loses its shine a little bit, but it is very important. The little steps are so important when it comes to making a cheesecake. Letting that crust cool. That's the only reason I made one ahead of time, because I don't want to put a cheesecake filling onto a warm crust because it will just seep right through and make it soft. So we're going to now, while the one crust is baking, get into the filling. And the first thing you want to do is melt your chocolate. Now, between the filling and the topping, this cheesecake uses over a pound of chocolate. So first I've measured 12 ounces, that's 360 grams of semi-sweet chocolate into my bowl. This looks like they're chocolate chips, like you would use in chocolate chip cookies. This is baking chocolate. It's couverture chocolate, and I get lots of great questions about that. You do want to use baking chocolate whenever you're melting chocolate to work into a recipe, because if you were to use compound or coating chocolate, and I know Cherry, you asked this question, if you were to use coating chocolate, it's made to set. It's made to coat the outside of things, and you'll find you'll get a granular texture to your cheesecake. The same thing if you were to melt chocolate chips. So baking chocolate sometimes comes in squares, it depends where you buy it, or it comes in bars, or in chip form or fev, different shapes. What you want to do, regardless, is melt it gently. And so I always prefer to use a water bath. So I've got my pot with just an inch of water, and you want it not boiling or bubbling, just so that it's producing tiny little bubbles at the bottom of the pot and generating steam. And it's the gentle steam that's heating the bowl that then melts the chocolate within it. Now you'll notice I'm using a glass bowl, and that is for your benefit only. I actually prefer melting chocolate in a metal bowl because the metal conducts the heat so quickly, and that chocolate immediately starts melting, and glass holds the heat for a long time. But it means you can see what I'm doing. So that's the only reason. Otherwise, if I were just doing this on my own, I would use a metal bowl. You can melt your chocolate in the microwave, but you have to be very careful. And I'll be honest, it takes almost the same amount of time, because you have to set your heat not on high on the microwave, but on medium. And you have to be stirring that chocolate every 10 seconds, even if there's no visible difference, because it will melt on the outside before the inside has a chance to heat up, and you risk burning it. And I can fix lots of things that go wrong in the baker's kitchen. I can't fix burnt chocolate that comes out of the microwave. So take your time, and I'm just letting, as my pot heats up, I'm letting the heat from the bowl do its thing first. You don't have to stir vigorously. In fact, you want to stir gently when you're melting chocolate. And are we on the chocolate cam?
We are.
Oh, it's really all about the chocolate right now. So you can, there's some steam starting to come around the sides of the bowl. So that's a good indicator to turn down the heat because it's too hot. And then just let the heat of the bowl do its thing. You don't want to use a whisk when you're stirring your melting chocolate. And I should tell you, the reason I chose semi-sweet, I'm very specific in that recipe. You'll notice in my recipes, in some cases I call for dark chocolate, in some I call for bittersweet chocolate, and some I call for semi-sweet. When I call for dark chocolate, then the choice is yours. You can use anywhere from semi-sweet to bittersweet, and that ranges in cocoa solid percentages. The semi-sweet chocolates are anywhere from 51 to almost 60% cocoa solids. Nice balance of dark chocolate and sweetness to them. And the bittersweet chocolates are above 60%, up to 70%. And so they have a stronger, more robust and bitter and sometimes a more acidic taste. And that's good when you're using a little bit of chocolate for a lot of chocolate impact. I found when I did this recipe using bittersweet chocolate, it was too much. It just simply overwhelmed, and you didn't get that creaminess that you want to taste in a cheesecake. When I pulled it back and used semi-sweet chocolate, this is 54%. I found I just got that perfect balance of chocolate flavor, sweetness, along with that creamy texture that you look for in a good cheesecake. And so the warm chocolate, as you're melting your chocolate, the warm chocolate around what's left of the solid chocolate just keeps melting it. So once you start getting this smooth fluid consistency, it happens very, very quickly. So now that I've got some heat within the chocolate, this is when I want to stir just a little bit more. And you can even pull it off the heat before the chocolate has completely melted and just let the carryover heat continue to melt it, because we do want this chocolate, it doesn't have to cool to room temperature, but we do want it to cool down a little bit, which is why we're doing this first before we start making the cheesecake filling. Oh, it's becoming nice and fluid. Super glossy. I can still see some bits of the chocolate in there, but that's all right. Actually, this is a great opportunity as it just finishes melting to take a question, because I've made note of some of the questions you've asked ahead of time. I've checked on social media. I am paying attention and I want to let you know. So, Rhea asked, she had a recipe for a chocolate amaretto cheesecake and she lost the recipe and she wants to know if I would have a similar version. Now, amaretto is an almond liqueur and it has a very distinctive flavor. I would say, Rhea, that this recipe would suit adding almond liqueur to amaretto. And you would add it after you've added your chocolate at the very end of the mixing process. I would say 2 tablespoons, so 1 ounce would be plenty to add a beautiful flavor. And you wouldn't have to change any of the other proportions in the recipe. So I'd love to know if you make that version. Please let me know, send me a picture. I'd love to check it out. It's always a good habit when you take your chocolate off your water bath to wipe the bottom of the bowl. You want to keep water out of direct contact with chocolate. So it's just a good habit to develop. Cools down the bowl slightly, and now I can set this aside and start working on my cheesecake filling. Now I want to make sure you've got a clean shot of this, Michael, as I blend the filling. Is that placement good?
A little closer.
Oh, he wants it a little closer. Yeah. So I have already softened my 3 tubs of cream cheese. So 750 grams of cream cheese total. This is a big cheesecake. The good news is, I know Cherry was asking, can you freeze cheesecake? Yes, you can, 100%. You have to wrap it well, and I find cheesecake doesn't freeze solid when you put it in the freezer. So it can get dented or bruised easily. So if there's any way you can put it in a container to protect it, you'll find then it comes out and you thaw it overnight in the fridge and it's good to go. Or you can cut it into pieces, because cheesecake, especially one of this size, feeds a lot. And you may not be entertaining at the same level that you may be used to. I know I'm certainly not. I miss having dinner parties. It's a great excuse to make more desserts. So my cream cheese is at room temperature, and interestingly, while I usually use firm or brick cream cheese in cheesecakes, with a chocolate cheesecake, you can use the softer cream cheese that comes out of a tub, which is absolutely fantastic. So the key when it comes to a nice smooth and creamy cheesecake, scrape your bowl, and scrape your bowl again. So I'm going to beat the cream cheese on a medium speed to start. It's already nice and smooth. Scrape that right to the bottom of the bowl. And let me get myself a little plate to set my spatula on. Now you want to add your sugar next. And so what you want to be cautious of is your speeds depending on the ingredients you're adding. When you're beating your cream cheese, adding your sugar, adding other ingredients such as the sour cream and the cocoa powder I'll be adding, medium speed is absolutely fine. The minute you start adding your eggs, you slow down the speed. And I'll explain that when I get to the eggs in a second. I don't want to add the sugar all at once because then you'll develop lumps. All of that sugar added to the cream cheese at one time is just too much for the cream cheese to take. So you add it in a little at a time, you let the sugar dissolve into it, scrape the bowl right to the bottom, and then that helps avoid lumps. So I've got my 3/4 of a cup, so 150 grams of granulated sugar, and half a cup or 100 grams of, oh, there's my crust, 100 grams of brown sugar that I'll be adding just a little at a time. At the very least, if you're in a rush, in 2 additions, if you have to. Let me grab the crust. Well, I can smell the chocolate. Got a little chocolate cam action there. Doesn't look a whole lot different, but I can smell the difference. I'm gonna set this one aside to cool. Really, it takes 20 minutes or so to cool down completely before you can add your filling, so that's why I did do one ahead of time. All right, back to adding the sugar. Immediately, you will notice the consistency of the cream cheese change when you start adding the cream cheese. But the lumps are always hiding at the bottom, so that's why you want to scrape right through to the bottom. And now I'll keep adding. Brown sugar is slightly coarser than granulated sugar, so it can take a little longer to dissolve into the cheesecake mixture. I like using a bit of brown sugar in my chocolate cheesecakes because it lends just a hint of a caramel flavor that complements the chocolate so nicely. If you didn't have brown sugar, you could use all white sugar. Conversely, you could use the other way around, all brown sugar, if that's what you prefer. And of course, another scrape, which is actually easy to do from this angle. All right, so this filling is noticeably softer, and now it's time for the next ingredients to enhance the chocolate flavor a little bit, but really to help lend to a silky smooth cheesecake that holds together well and slices well. Typically with a vanilla cheesecake, you would add a bit of flour or a bit of cornstarch. So I'm taking that same principle, but amping up the chocolate a little bit and adding 3 tablespoons of cocoa powder. Now you'll notice in the recipe, I just say cocoa powder. I don't specify Dutch or regular or any particular type. And usually I do. If I want you to use Dutch process, it's for a specific reason. And you've asked that question, you know, well, why in some recipes and not in others? That was half a teaspoon of salt, by the way. The Dutch process cocoa powder has the acidity reduced, and that's important when you're baking cakes with baking powder and baking soda. In the case of this cheesecake, it's there for texture and for a little bit of flavor, so whatever you have on hand will work perfectly. I am going to add a teaspoon of vanilla, and now I'll start on low speed simply because the cocoa powder is so dusty. And as soon as that starts blending in, I can increase the speed. Now, I don't know if you can see the side of the bowl clearly enough, but what looks chocolatey on the inside of the bowl, almost like milk chocolate, is actually white on the outside. It clearly shows you how important it is to scrape your bowl and get that unblended mixture out. Because if you do have streaks of unevenly mixed filling, that can contribute to the cracking in your cheesecake. Because if you have a ribbon of cheesecake that has lots of egg, and next to it a ribbon of cheesecake that doesn't have a lot of egg, if they're not mixed evenly, as that cheesecake bakes, well, that's where a crack would develop between those two sort of unevenly blended combinations. So that's something to keep in mind. Always scrape your bowl. Now, to balance out the set that all of my chocolate will lend to this cheesecake, if I just simply added my chocolate to my 3 cups of cream cheese, well, I would end up with a cheesecake that's dense, and it might even crumble a little bit because of the chocolate. So I need to make the cheesecake creamier, if that's hardly possible. And so I'm adding 3/4 of a cup of sour cream. Now that's typical to a New York style cheesecake anyhow. So you're playing with a principle that's already in practice when it comes to making delicious cheesecakes. So I'm just spooning that into my measuring cup, 3/4 of a cup. There we go. And then that gets added all at once, because if it's of a like texture to that cheesecake base. And guess what? We mix and scrape the bowl again. Now that the cream cheese has so many ingredients added to it, things combine far easier. And this is important because now it's time for the next ingredients. Making a cheesecake is essentially like making a custard, except instead of milk and eggs as your custard, or cream and egg yolks in the case of creme brulee, we've got cream cheese and a combination of whole eggs and egg yolks to make our custard. I'm just gonna create a little space here to separate and combine my eggs. So we need 4 whole eggs and 1 egg yolk for this recipe to give it the proper set. So I'll just crack my eggs into a bowl, and I like to whisk them together before I add them to my cheesecake. I don't always do that, but I always crack them before I add them to the bowl, because it can be so easy as your mixer's going. If you crack the egg right into the mixer as it's going, that's the one time you'll drop a big piece of shell and that mixer just takes it away and you'll never see it again until it's your mom or your sister-in-law who ends up getting that piece of eggshell in the bite. That one bite, the one piece. All right, and now I'll separate my yolks. I'll keep the whites for something meringue later. Just to let you know, I've been working on a new macaron method. I didn't invent the method, but it's a method that I've really embraced and have been playing with it, and I've had such good luck with this new way of making macarons. So perhaps you got to give me a little more time to work on the recipe. I like to make the mistakes so you don't have to. Hopefully I'll be able to share it with you sometime soon. I've always got new things on the go. So now, oh, and we were speaking of custards. Mary had asked the question about, she makes my creme caramel recipe, and thank you for making it, but she finds she's having trouble with its setting. That the custard never sets in the center. And that could be one of 2 things. Even though I'm sure, Mary, you are following my cooking times to a letter, your oven might behave differently and fluctuate in temperature more than someone else's. And so you basically have to keep cooking it a little bit longer. So a creme caramel, while it's this big around, should be set about halfway. So the middle sort of 1.5 inches can still be jiggly when you're pulling it from the oven, and the carryover cooking will keep it cooking. If you're finding it's still not setting, it could be actually the thickening power of your eggs. Eggs are different country to country, and they're even different times of year. I have found This time of year here in Southern Ontario, the egg yolks in the eggs I've been buying lately have been paler than normally. And so I'm finding they're not having quite the thickening power. So you may find you have to add an extra yolk, even an extra half an egg, which means take an egg, whisk it to combine the yolk and the white and measure out 2 tablespoons. That's half an egg. That may be all you need to just give your creme caramel the perfect set. Good questions. I like these smart questions because it means you're thinking as you're baking, and then that keeps me thinking as I'm baking. So you'll notice, I am not mixing now anymore on high speed. Once you start adding the eggs, you gotta keep that mixing to a minimum. And that's so you're not aerating the eggs. And the reason you don't want to aerate the eggs is because the eggs will remember they were aerated. They want to poof up. They want to rise in the oven, which is why they're great in sponge cakes and meringues and so many wonderful desserts. But we don't want that to happen here because when your eggs get overbeaten in your cheesecake, they'll rise up with the heat of the oven and then they'll collapse as they cool. And what happens? Boom, your cheesecake tears in the center. And that's the key reason why cracks develop. So low speed is key as you add. Gives us more of a chance to chat. And now, even though I have the chocolate left to add, I will do that on low speed because the eggs are in there. I may even finish mixing by hand, but I'll start. We definitely want the chocolate cam for this one, Michael. So the chocolate's still a little warm. I can feel it through the bowl. In it goes. Now, I'm not done with this chocolate yet. Yeah, the rest I'd like to do by hand. That way I can get the mixer out of the way and show you well. Now, what is very key, my chocolate is still a bit warm, which is important. Having your other ingredients at room temperature is also just as important. And that's because if you have cold eggs or ice cold sour cream that you're adding to your recipe, well, the chocolate, when it hits that cool mixture, might seize up, and then you won't have a smooth cheesecake. You'll have a graininess to it because the chocolate actually kind of goes back to its solid form before it's even had a chance to bake. And being in the oven, it's not being mixed again, so it won't melt out smoothly. But you can see I've got a nice, beautiful chocolate smooth consistency here. I will definitely bring that forward, and I also want to get every last bit of this delicious chocolate in there. There we go. Move that out of the way. And I'm back just to stir in that remaining chocolate. Okay. There we go. So this cheesecake has a lot of volume to it, as you can see. I'm gonna get my tea kettle going because to cook this cheesecake, we want to use a water bath, a bain-marie. And what you want to do is take your Springform pan, still wrapped in foil, and you want to find some sort of roasting pan or a pan with a dish that this can rest into. It doesn't have to be a monstrous pan, but you want to be able to fill it with water at least halfway up the sides of your Springform pan. It doesn't have to be submerged or at level because that just makes it impossible to carry to the oven. And this is heavy enough. But now, while I'm waiting for my tea kettle to boil, in goes, I can see I needed to scrape my bowl at the bottom more. I'm gonna do that in the cheesecake pan. There we go. No cracking cheesecakes. But as I said before, chocolate cheesecakes are less prone to cracking than a conventional vanilla one. So keep that in mind. And you could add flavorings to the chocolate if you wanted to. Spirits or not, a little bit of orange zest. You would add that as you're adding your cocoa powder and vanilla and your salt. After you've beaten your cream cheese and your sugar together would be the perfect time for that. And letting that tea kettle boil before I move into the next step allows me to check on a couple of other questions. Now, Fauzia, Dimitri, and Ahmed, you were asking lots of questions about cracking the cheesecake. So why don't we talk about that for a second? Because the cheesecake's going to go into the oven, which is at 325. So if your oven was set warmer, you can bake the crust at 350 or 325, 10 minutes. It's really not going to make a difference. But when it comes to the cheesecake itself, you want to make sure it's at 325 with the water bath. And it's going to take, I find it takes 65 minutes. So just over an hour. I find it an hour, it still is too jiggly in the center. And you will find as it bakes, the cheesecake filling will liquefy, it gets really shiny, and then it starts to set and it loses its shine gradually from the outside in. If you ever see the cheesecake start to souffle at the edges, it's a sign your oven is too hot. So you want to reduce the temperature by 25 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. That will help control the cooking. But essentially by cooking in a water bath, you are protecting the cheesecake. You're cooking it like you do a custard, a creme brulee, or a creme caramel. And it's the moisture, just like the moisture from the steam was a gentle way to melt the chocolate. The water protects and insulates the cheesecake so it cooks more evenly. It allows it to cook all the way through without the outside overcooking. So for a chocolate cheesecake, I find that's preferred. When I do my New York cheesecake, which you've probably seen me bake right here on Oh Yum, then I do that with a dry method. So I just put it in the oven, but I'm constantly changing the oven temperature. I start warm and then I get cooler, 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 cooler. So this stays at 325 or 160 Celsius for the entire 65 minutes. Now what is very important, because even though you made sure all your ingredients were at room temperature and you made sure that you didn't overbeat your eggs and everything is well combined, that final step to prevent a crack from happening is after 15 minutes of letting your cheesecake cool out of the oven, take your offset spatula and run it on the inside edge of your springform pan. You'll find the cheesecake releases. And so that way, as the cheesecake cools and contracts a little bit, if it wants to crack, it's going to instead pull away from the sides and it might kind of shrink in a little bit, but you won't get that cracking in the center. If it's stuck to the sides of the pan and it starts contracting, it'll pull from the middle, and that's how you get that crack. That's why sometimes if you make a cheesecake, it looks perfectly fine and then you put it in the fridge and the next morning it's got a crack in it. Which reminds me of the other important tip. Make sure your cheesecake cools completely to room temperature before you put it in the fridge. So if you're starting this project at 10 o'clock at night, you may be up a while, or you need to set the alarm because it may take until 1 in the morning. It could take 2 to 3 hours to cool that cheesecake after it's come out of the oven. I've got my hot water here. So now I'm going to avoid pouring it onto the cheesecake itself. I'll just pour it around so it comes halfway up the sides of the cheesecake. This is going to weigh a bit. There we go. Let's open the oven first. Final chocolate cam shot of this, Michael. Do you see it?
Gotcha.
There we go. In it goes. Say goodbye. There we go. So you'll find that after the 65 minutes in a 325 oven, and after you've let it cool for 15 minutes, you run that spatula around the inside edge, you'll find that it's easier to remove the cheesecake from the pan because, of course, now you've unstuck it from the sides. So once you want to chill it, you want to give it at least 6 hours to chill. So it's always good to plan a cheesecake a day ahead. It just takes the stress out of it if you are making it as a birthday cake or a special a marker for a special occasion for someone. Get it done ahead of time so you can focus on the fun part, which is putting on the chocolate ganache. So here is the cheesecake out of its pan and well chilled. So yes, I did make this yesterday. You've got nice straight sides to it. If you find you're not happy with how the sides came out of your pan, sometimes the outside of a cheesecake can look a little rough. The simple fix is actually to take some chocolate cookie crumbs and you just press it on the sides of the cheesecake and it gives it a nice polished look. In this case though, we've got some nice clean sides. You could even take your spatula and just smooth it out. This cheesecake is just so creamy and decadent, and with that 12 ounces, 360 grams of chocolate, you know it's rich. So let's just make it a little richer with a chocolate ganache topping. So now I've got my remaining ingredients, including 3/4 of a cup of cream. This is whipping cream. And I've also got 6 ounces of chocolate. So combined with that 12 ounces, that's 1 pound and 2 ounces of chocolate. That's pretty amazing. Now normally, you'll see in the recipe, I put the butter into the cream and melt it. But then it takes longer to cool. So I'm actually going to add the butter to my bowl of 6 ounces of chocolate, and that will help cool the ganache faster so I can use it right away to put on this cake. So I'll go back to measuring. This time I want 3 tablespoons. Now typically a ganache is equal parts chocolate and cream. That's sort of your foundation ganache. There we go. But I find if you just make a straight cream and chocolate ganache for on top of a cake, it doesn't set up enough and you don't get a nice clean slice. So that's why you'll see some of my recipes, and I know you've asked this question, why some of my ganache recipes call for the addition of butter, and that's the reason. So I'm just cutting in 3 tablespoons, which is the same as 45 grams. And this is unsalted. Oh, there we are. We're done. And now you'll notice I turned the heat on my whipping cream just on low to get it going. Don't put your whipping cream on high unless you're ready to stand and watch it, because it goes from 0 to 60 so fast. It'll look like nothing's happening and all of a sudden it's boiling over, and your cream will boil over if you're not careful. Oh, I should answer a question while we are waiting for this cream. There's a young viewer, Michelle, who is aspiring to be a baker and a chef someday. And Michelle, I'm so excited that you have that enthusiasm and passion for baking. And Michelle asked, well, where did I go to cooking school? I studied at Johnson & Wales University in Colorado. Even though I didn't grow up in Colorado, it was a program that suited me. I was ready to fast track and get to work and start cooking and baking. So that's the program that suited me. So Michelle, you have to find a program that works for you. I noticed you were writing from India, if I have that correctly, and I should say that my husband teaches culinary arts at Niagara College, and he has a number of students from India in his classes. So there are ways, if you want to come over to Canada and study here, just bring a winter coat if you're coming for winter. You've been warned. Now here, you can see, can you see on the cam, Michael, that how quickly, this is induction heat, so the heat has to hit quickly. Like, it just goes from, look at how quickly it boils up. And it will, woo, take that off the heat. And I'm gonna pour it right over the chocolate. And I know we wanna get a little closer here, don't we? So now this is where you want to let the cream do its thing for a minute. It's nice and hot. Let it get into the chocolate and the butter. Melt it for a second before you start stirring it. And when you stir it, you can whisk if you want. I prefer to use a spatula and just be gentle about it to incorporate the cream and butter together. And then this at the same time cools the cream. And this just makes such a rich, satiny topping to this cheesecake. Over the top. Now you could go with the drip cake style if you wanted to. If you wanted to go with the official sort of super drip cake look, you would transfer your ganache to a squeeze bottle, or half of this anyhow. And then you would paint drips along the edge of the cake. I find with a cheesecake, because it's a lower height than traditional drip cakes that are conventional cakes layered up with frosting, it doesn't show off as well. So I'm gonna go for just simply the pour over the top of the cake itself. But I'll leave that up to you. If you do wanna see a fabulous and delicious drip cake in action, check out my salted caramel layer cake. It's one of the new videos from my series Occasions right here on the YouTube channel, the Oh Yum channel, and the salted caramel cake is pretty decadent, let me tell you, and I do the full-on caramel drip on that cake. Okay, now chocolate melts at a lower temperature than butter, so all of my chocolate is smooth, but I can see I just have a few pieces of butter still in there that I'm waiting to dissolve. I think that's why chocolate is so delicious, right? You think about it, it melts at lower than body temperature, which is why when you put it on your tongue and it just melts away into deliciousness, you have to love it. So we definitely want to line up this chocolate cam right, Michael. Tell me if I'm in place well.
You're good.
All right. Now, when it comes to pouring chocolate, I work left-handed here with my spatula, so this may seem awkward. Oh, look at that. And I'm just gonna let gravity do its thing. Now, something else that's open to you is if you're not happy with the sides of your cake, you simply completely enrobe this ganache in this cheesecake in chocolate. And you can push it over the sides. This one, now the first one I did, I actually covered completely in chocolate. Yes, I have another cheesecake in the fridge, just in case this didn't set up in time. But this one, I want to go for a different look. And I'm just going to spread it right to the edges and try not to go over, or if I do, barely. Now, don't forget, this cheesecake is chilled, so it's going to immediately start setting the chocolate. So you want to avoid swishing and swirling too much. Ooh, I have one drip that's starting on that side. It's actually quite appealing. So as this sets up, you're good to go. So you pop this in the fridge, give it half an hour, then it is ready to serve and slice, and you want to slice it cold. Now you've got a perfect amount of space to write happy birthday, happy anniversary. You can also, though, garnish it with some other goodies if you wish. And just because I did want to show you one, here we go. Fully set, so you can see you get this gorgeous sort of satin finish once the cheesecake sets up fully. Can you see that okay, or is the focus?
Great.
Yeah, all right. I love this. Now I'm gonna grab some fruits and a bit of cream. And something I've newly gotten the habit of having on hand is a baked cookie streusel. It's an almond streusel that's got a hint of cinnamon to it, and it always adds a nice crunch when you need it. So I've got some cut up strawberries and blueberries, a little bit of cream, and some streusel. So we're just going to decorate a little bit, just for an accent. You can make it complicated. I've seen some of the beautiful work you bakers do on social media. I see the hashtags and I follow them, the Oh Yum hashtag. So I see the desserts you're making, the beautiful work you're doing. So if you're getting into making macaron, well, you could pop a couple macaron here. On goes the gold flake, other things. And I'm just creating just a bit of an arc here. Pop of cream. We got the nice color from the berries. Couple more blueberries could do the trick. You could glaze this if you wanted. I wouldn't recommend a dusting of icing sugar because that would just hide all the work you just put into this beautiful cheesecake. And then just a few crumble pieces, a bit of crunch and texture. There we go. You've seen me do this start to finish right in front of you now, so I know you can make this cheesecake, and I know you're going to want to make this cheesecake because I love getting your comments and questions. Your enthusiasm behind baking is matched only by my own and my interest in answering your questions. Now, the last bit, because we've got these two beautiful cheesecakes here, and you're wondering, well, what's the best way to slice the cheesecake? And that is actually, I'm gonna pour some hot water in here. The best way to slice a cheesecake and get clean slices is with a hot, dry knife. So what I do is I heat up my knife. You wanna either immerse it or pour hot, hot, hot. It can be hot tap water, but get that metal blade nice and hot. Then it's very important to dry it off. And that makes making that slice, it kind of half melts through. And with each cut, you want to dip and wipe again. There we go. That way it cuts cleanly through the ganache. See, if I had a ganache without the butter, it would have sort of squished and bruised the whole cheesecake had I done that slice. And all that work, you don't want it to go to waste. We'll lift out that slice. Mm-hmm. All right, so now we're definitely on the chocolate cam now. Let's give this a little whipped cream and a little strawberry. So you can see it slices cleanly, but it's creamy, it's dense. It doesn't have any air pockets to it. So you know it's got that full, compact, intense chocolate flavor, but at the same time, it should be light and fluffy on the palate and so inviting. And before I take a big bite of chocolate and get it everywhere and it makes it difficult to speak to you, I really want to say thank you for joining me. I know you're going to love this triple chocolate cheesecake recipe. I've enjoyed making it for you, and keep asking those baking questions because you know I listen. I love answering them, and there are lots more of these recipes coming down the line, so I can't wait to see you again. Thanks again to Rolling Meadow for giving me this opportunity. You can even hear the squish. Mm-hmm. It's not overly sweet. It's amazing. Oh, love a good cheesecake.